I have quite an introduction for Riss, so I hope nobody minds that I don't have it memorized. But if you'll permit me to begin. Marissa McCool is a podcast host, author, blogger, columnist, LGBT rights activist, speaker, filmmaker, and stage performer whose goal is to speak out, speak loudly, and bring visibility to LGBT issues. As host of the Inciting Incident podcast, which has a global reach and averages over 30,000 downloads per month, she begins interesting conversations on difficult topics in current events, such as LGBT rights, transgender visibility, suicide, mental health awareness, and the myths of politically correct culture. She is the author of 7 books, including The PC Lie, How American Voters Decided I Don't Matter, and the novel False Start. And I think there's a new novel too, right?
Yes, it's not out yet, but my book of poetry and essays is here.
Fantastic. Riss has been lovingly nicknamed the Purple Amazon for her bright purple hair, super queer affectionately for her openness about her identity and sexuality, and most notably the badass mistress of the podcast and written word universe by the fine people at Utah Outcast. And I've heard enough episodes of her show to say that's pretty accurate. She lives in central Pennsylvania with her husband and 2 children, and recently graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. I want to figure out how you dealt with that commute for as long as you did, by the way. In July, she will host her own live event at the Carlisle Theater for the 100th episode of The Inciting Incident, featuring her Inciting Incident co-host, social activist, and former Minnesota Vikings punter, Chris Kluwe, and fellow podcasters from the Gaytheist Manifesto, Opening Arguments, The Scathing Atheist, and God Awful Movies. And now please help me welcome Riss McCool.
You ain't a girl, you a man. You aren't a pretty girl, you're fucking ugly. Jesus, keep it to yourself. Why would you ever talk about this? Why would you ever want to talk about this? Are you sure you don't have multiple personality disorder? Are you sure you're not just depressed? Are you sure you're not just confused? Are you sure you're not just a drag queen? Are you sure you're really Marissa? Why can't you just be gay? Why can't I use pronouns I know you by? Why can't I call you the name you were born with? Why aren't you just that name? Why aren't you just that body? Why wouldn't you want to keep it? Why wouldn't you want to have more kids? What will the kids say? What will the parents say? What will other people's parents say? What will other people say? How will you ever get a girlfriend acting like this? Don't you want to be a provider? Don't you want to step up and be a man? Don't you want to be a man? Aren't you a man? You're just you to me. You've always been just you. Your gender doesn't matter to me. Your genitals don't matter to me. Nobody cares about your genitals. Gross. Do you still have a dick? Are you going to get surgery? Are those tits real? You're so tall. How will you ever pass? Why can't you just do it in private? Why should we have to change? Why should you have to be different? We don't have to accept you. I'm not transphobic, but I just don't want a dick. I just don't consider you a real woman. I'm straight, sorry. You're really cute and everything, but I just like vaginas. You understand, right? I'm straight, not gay. That's all that matters. That would be a deal breaker. It's confusing. How would I explain it to my parents that I'm dating a tranny? Faggot, queen, pillow biter, queer, tranny, she-male, ladyboy, dude in a dress, fake woman, not a woman. It's just science. It's just biology. It's just Jesus. It's just reality. It's just my opinion, man. You need to calm down. You need to understand other opinions. You're immature, you're lazy, you're pretentious, you're dramatic. You need to lay off the sensitivity hormones. Were you always this much of a bitch? You're just too much for me. You need to stop being so defensive. Not everyone is staring at you. Not everyone is afraid of you. Not everyone wants to hurt you. How will you ever get a girlfriend acting like that? Stop saying no and shut up. Just let me touch you. Fine, stop being such a bitch. Stop resisting. Stop it. Stop it. Take it, bitch. Take it. This is what happens when you play hard to get. This is what happens when you dress the way you do. This is what happens when you are who you are. This is what happens when you're transgender. You deserve it. You asked for it. You should expect it. What do you expect? Look where you are. If you've got a penis, use the men's room. If you're trans in the men's room, I'll kick your ass. If my masculinity is so fragile, let me hit you. There's no sexism anymore. Feminism isn't necessary. Feminism is outdated. Feminists hate men. Feminists don't need to include trans women. All women have vaginas. All born women were really women. This is how you really feel. This is how you need to act. This is how you need to feel. This is how you need to change. This is how you need to be to make it easier on me. You give a bad name to trans women. You're too radical. You're too angry. You're too bold. You're too confrontational. Nothing's ever going to change their mind. Why even bother? Why not just stealth it? Can't you hide your breasts? Who cares what they think? Just ignore it. They'll go away. Just use the family bathroom. What do you expect? It's their opinion. It's how they were raised. It's how they were taught. It's how they were shown religion. It's not something they can identify with. If you cut it off, won't it hurt? If you get the surgery, you'll still be a man. You'll still be a man. You'll always be a man. You can't change gender. Gender and sex are the same. Gender and sex can't be changed. I have more of a right to your identity than you do. I know better than you. You're just confused. You're just lost. You're just brainwashed. You're just young and stupid. You're being manipulated by your professors. You're on drugs. You're going to hell. You have no respect for your spouse. How do you think they feel? How do you think I feel? It's going to take time to adjust. Didn't you think about how this would affect me? Are you sure this is right? Are you sure this is you? Are you sure? Hate. So, as they said, my name is Marissa, and my job is to make you a little bit uncomfortable. Little bit. Not Donald Trump wanting to give you the bowling ball grip, but a little bit. I just came back from Salt Lake City, unfortunately. And apparently Expedia likes to book hotel rooms and take your money and then not give you a hotel room at midnight and then go, sucks. But it's interesting because I just spent 4 years in Philadelphia going to the University of Pennsylvania, or as anyone outside of Philadelphia calls it, Penn State. And it's not that I'm unfamiliar with assholes. As I said, I went to school in Philadelphia. The difference is people in Philadelphia are just assholes. They're not assholes because of who you are. It's Philly. You'll get run over by a car, but it won't be because you're queer. Or it won't be because of where you come from. They just don't pay attention to crosswalks. And neither do the pedestrians for that matter. But as I was in Salt Lake City, a supposedly metropolitan city, on Pride weekend, my girlfriend and I were walking around town, and no less than 20 times were we shouted slurs at for existing, for daring to walk hand in hand on a public sidewalk, for daring to be visible while queer and not apologize for it. During Pride weekend, like I said, for those of you who don't know the name Misty K. Snow, she was the first trans person to run for Senate, and she did it in Utah, the state that hasn't sent a Democrat to the Senate in, I don't know, since before Joseph Smith or something. But that takes more courage than even I would ever have. And she works in a grocery store. The woman who ran for Senate last year works in a grocery store and wanted to meet me. I still don't understand those words put in that order. I'm still not used to being visible or heard by more than those who already would be listening. So to be up here standing before you fine people, it's still a very surreal experience to me. Because most of you see me as who I am now. But my family here, my friends who came before I transitioned, they're the ones who had to see the falling apart, the neurosis, the absolute breakdowns, the questioning, the regrets, the doubts, the tears that I shed thinking that I'll never get to be who I am. A lot of people like to throw the word lucky at me. I hate that word, especially in this context. To give you a little bit of background, I was pretty advanced in elementary school, but this was the early 90s. So they weren't going to put you in more difficult material or put you up a grade. They just said, why don't we just put you on independent study for 4 years? That'll work out well. So I hit junior high with 5 years of being told, you don't have to participate in the rest of the class. You can do whatever you want. What could go wrong? Anybody who's ever been in junior high as a person knows junior high kids are the worst people on the planet. They make Salt Lake City seem like a peace resort. And that's the thing I noticed about these people in Salt Lake City. I heard those insults when I was in 4th grade. One of my particular favorites was a dude bro, and I love that word so much, who, while we, again, were just walking while existing, sat up on one of those electronic box things that operates traffic lights or whatever, and like he's the Walter Cronkite of spotting the gay, goes, "We got two queers here sitting in a tree." And all I could think was, "You're sitting, we're walking, dumbass. Come on, sitting in a tree?" We used to say that in first grade before we even knew how to spell the word we were saying. It was just cool because it kind of rhymed. So if any of those bigots from Salt Lake City are watching, do better. I expect better. If you're gonna, and I do appreciate the one person who called us dykes, because at least they got the gender right. As you notice, I use a lot of the slurs that are thrown at me because they don't deserve to have the power that they think they have. I have to deal with a lot of well-meaning cisgender heterosexual people who like to tell me how to handle my experience. Or worse, like to tell me what my experience is. A lot of those words I read in that poem were just that. They didn't all come from people like someone I know called Pastor Carl, who decided to tell me that I'm a sorceress, and then told me that God hates volleyball players. So you can pick up my t-shirt, "I'm a trans sorceress and God hates volleyball," on my Patreon, just saying. But isn't this absolutely absurd that in the year 2017, I have to stand up here and tell you that I was verbally assaulted for existing? Haven't we gotten to the point where we can use that internet box to do more than pretend we're looking at straight porn when you're looking at transgender porn and then turn around and fight against their rights? When people use the word she-male, I kind of figure out where they got their first exposure to trans people. And I'm not against fetish. I'm really not. I'm not out here to fetish shame anyone, but those people that you pretend you're not attracted to, except in close quarters, they exist too. And they have just as much right to be a person as you do. I can't tell you who said it because it's been said so often. But when you're born into the societal default, cisgendered, heterosexual, white, if you're in that position, you might say something like, "I'm tired of all the labels. Why do we need so many labels?" Well, you probably never needed them. Or if you did, it was, "I'm a Boston Red Sox fan," which I'm not. God, that's just an example. I would never do that to myself or my children. But the point is, you have the ability, and I'm going to say a buzzword here, privilege, to say, "But I'm just a guy." Because you have the ability to say, "I'm just a guy," and people are going to assume what you mean and probably be pretty close to accurate. They may not get your particular interests or tastes right, but they're probably not going to misgender you or use the wrong pronouns or assume things about your entire identity, and they're probably not going to correct you either. I have yet to hear one story of a cis friend of mine being told, "Well, what's on your birth certificate? What were you born as? What's in your pants? Are you getting the surgery?" Because that's not something you're supposed to ask a person. So treat us the same way too. It's not that hard. When you are born into the societal default and you are born with a certain amount of privilege, other people having rights and existing and speaking up for their own existence feels like oppression. And that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. That makes a lot of people want to tell me to be nice or be nicer. I'll give you an example. There's a viral comment going around by someone named Andrew Jackson. The fact that he's associated with a genocidal maniac that somehow won the presidency is not irrelevant to this conversation. But he said, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't want to memorize this asshole, "If I ever found out that my date was transgender, I would beat the shit out of her. I'm glad trans people get murdered, and I hope it happens more." Someone decided to send that to me, and my response was, I'm a 6'3" former professional wrestler who has stealth training, is trained in katana, and spent a year learning how to become a sniper in the graveyards of Gettysburg at midnight. Try to beat the shit out of me, see what happens. Apparently that was the line. Apparently that was going too far. Because some very nice cis straight white people decided to tell me that I'm never going to get allies if I'm just as bad as they are. I should just let comments like that go. I should just let comments like that pass on by, because I'm never going to change anybody's mind. People just have their right to an opinion, and you can't do anything about it. Let's review. Someone saying we should get murdered more, that's just their opinion. Me going, how about you not do that? Just as bad as saying people should get murdered. Are we all on the same page here? Good, good. Made sense to me. I wish this was an isolated incident, but it happens every single fucking day. That I have to insist on my humanity. That I have to insist that, hey, could you not beat the shit out of us? Could you not call us slurs? Could you not call us names? Could you not bother us when we're walking down the street? That is not something anyone should have to deal with, let alone someone who is treated by society as a person who should be cast aside as having a mental illness. And when they say, hey, don't say a word, you should say that word more because everybody's so politically correct these days. Here's a little exercise I like to do. Whenever you hear someone saying something that is too PC, like all these people and their genders, everything's so PC these days, change the word PC to the phrase not being an asshole. Try it. Everybody's so into not being an asshole these days, it's ridiculous. Everybody's just so into not being an asshole. You realize that most of those arguments about people being PC are some version of that. I used to be able to call people slurs and names, and now I can't. Or at least I can't without someone saying, hey, could you knock that off? That's oppression. The SJWs are out of control. Does anyone not know what SJW means? Okay. SJW is a pejorative that people made up. It's a social justice warrior, which was sarcastic because a lot of us on campuses had the nerve to stand up for other people. I know, everything's out of control. But then some of us who are in that fight, or at least trying to be, said, you're telling me that I fight for people who are marginalized, or perhaps aren't as visible on campus, or who, like I said, don't want to get murdered, or want to be a little less susceptible to suicide, or not get beat up in their high school, or not get thrown into an electroshock therapy place funded by our vice president. But the problem is students silently walking out of Mike Penn's commencement speech. That's where it gets out of control. That's where these SJWs just go too far. Because any marginalized person who actually stands up for themselves, and they don't have to. Let me make that clear. No trans person owes you an explanation. No trans person owes you visibility. No trans person owes you their identity. And that goes pretty much across the line for anybody. I make myself visible because other people cannot, at least safely. And if I can take those slurs from a bunch of people in Salt Lake City so the people going to Pride later that day don't have to at least a few less times, I'm fine with that. But I make myself available because I choose to. I don't owe it to you. If I have to disconnect for a while because I don't want to have to define the term cis for the 6th time that day and not be told, oh, I was just asking a simple question. Yeah, and you have this little Google box you can type a letter into and it'll tell you what it means. We are not your queer dictionary. There's one of those. It's very easily accessible. A few days ago when I started thinking about this speech, I didn't have anything outlined yet. But I'm also on about 48 podcasts now. And the only time I plan something is when my co-host on the Cis are getting out of hand, which is sarcastic before somebody accused me of being a cisphobe. We do skits, and for some reason, people who work with me need to know their lines for a sketch. I don't understand this. But I pretty much came down to the point of, I've done 94 episodes of Inciting Incident and I haven't scripted a word. Why would it be any different here? I feel forced when I have to follow a script or even an outline, which of course made me fail public speaking a couple times in community college when I was a little less willing to toe the line. But overall, I'm glad all of you are here. I'm glad all of you have decided to come listen to me, or at least aren't standing up and telling me that I deserve to be murdered for talking, or for walking down the street in the clothes that you don't think I should be wearing for what was on my birth certificate. And I say was because it's not anymore. Whenever someone says, I'm going to call you what's on your birth certificate, first of all, that's something they would never say to a cis person. The first day of school, when someone said, yep, Jennifer, could you call me Jen? Nobody said, well, your mother named you Jennifer. That's what's on your birth certificate. I'm just going to call you that. What's on my birth certificate is Marissa. What is on my social security card is Marissa. What is on my driver's license is Marissa. So to get to the 8th level of douchebaggery that you're still trying to grasp at this point, well, like the bills that haven't been updated, or from people who are trying to solicit your business but don't realize you have a new address now, call you my dead name. So that's what I'm going to call you. There's a man made of straw over there. Perhaps you've met him. Perhaps you'd like to grasp at a few. It's getting ridiculous. Trans people exist. They don't have a mental illness, and even if they did, that would not be an excuse to treat them like shit. Nobody goes, well, Jenny, she's schizophrenic. Let's not allow her to use the bathroom because she might assault somebody. And Jenny, she's schizophrenic. Better beat the shit out of her until she stops doing that. When you say something like that, when you use that it's a mental illness, it's not. When you use it to justify treating people like shit, you're an asshole for 2 reasons. Because you're also being ableist as hell. And if you think people deserve to be treated like shit because they have a mental illness, that's the second part of being a fucking douchebag. Like I said, I didn't have anything planned. Because as a visible trans person, I'm kind of one of the lucky ones. If someone says something terrible to me, all I have to do is screenshot it and 100 people are there with pitchforks. I wish it was that way for every trans person. I wish trans people didn't have to deal with that at all. I wish nobody had to deal with it. But until that's the case, you can call me any slur in the book that you want, but call me that. Don't call some kid who is just trying to figure out who they are that. They don't deserve it. Nobody deserves it. Nobody deserves to be told they don't have a right to their identity. Nobody deserves to be told they don't have a right to be who they are. Nobody deserves to be treated like shit because it's supposedly a choice. And like the mental illness thing, even if it was a choice, even if it was a complete decision, because I got on Tumblr in 2009 and saw the word transgender and I went, yeah, that sounds good, I'll go with that, like it's a store. It still wouldn't matter. It still wouldn't give you the right to treat us like shit. This is usually being peddled by people who like to brag about freedom. Freedom to be who you are. You can be anything you want when you grow up. You can do anything if you put your mind to it. Asterisk. Unless it makes me uncomfortable. Unless it goes against my religion. Unless, I don't know, I am oddly attracted to people of the same gender, but I figure this is somewhere in between, so I'll take you home to hook up with you, but I'm not going to introduce you to my mom or anything. That would just be gross. I have the privilege of being visible and being able to be visible. Because when I walk off the stage and go home, I'm probably not going to have someone there ready to throw something through my window or try to assault me. Probably not. Does anybody know who Sophie LaBelle is? For those of you who don't know, she does an online comic series called Assigned Male Comics, which essentially is another way that trans people are more comfortable with than being told you were born a guy. You were assigned a gender at birth. I've never been a guy. I've never been a man. People just thought I was, and I believed it until I couldn't pretend that I didn't anymore. That apparently means I deserve to be murdered to some people, and I shouldn't stand up to that, or I'm just as bad. I heard about the Nazi punching being a thing. Somehow that's still a thing. Somehow we're fighting about how to handle oppression between ourselves and fighting with each other while Donald Trump pulls out of the Paris Agreement and pretty much says, light the whole thing on fire. I won't be here to see it. Who gives a shit? I hosted a debate between two prominent atheists who have an opinion on this, Matthew O'Neill and Dan Arrell, who are both friends of mine. They got into a bit of a flame war, if that's still a word. I don't know. I can't keep up with the terminology these cis people use these days. Basically fighting, once again, for the 6th straight month, should we punch Nazis? Meanwhile, our president wants to set the world on fire, send us to electroshock therapy, and make sure all of his richer friends are richer. But I'm getting out of hand because I don't want to be called slurs. That makes sense. This is my friend Trans Pride Monster. He goes with me on the plane after I get groped by the TSA every fucking time. Because we have the technology to be able to scan you for weapons, but we still don't have the technology to know that someone with an F on their gender marker may have something in their groinal area that makes people uncomfortable. I travel a lot. Like I said, I was in Salt Lake City. The week before that, I was in Vermont. The week before that, I was in Florida. I've been to probably 12 states in the last 3 months because when you write a book and you want people to buy it, that's a good way to do it, is like make yourself visible. But someone like Sophie LaBelle, who has more followers than I could ever dream of having, lives in Canada, the ones we're looking up to right now for advice on how to people write, was banned on Facebook because of Nazis, actual Nazis. Because Facebook finds asserting your own identity more offensive than fucking Nazis. We now have a president who has emboldened Nazis and racists and hate mongers because everybody's being so politically correct by asserting their own right to exist. And shit got out of control. Them gays have had 2 years to get married and they haven't destroyed the world yet. We better take our country back. Some transgender woman is writing about comics, and occasionally they make me feel uncomfortable because they're cute. Seriously, Assigned Male Comics is the most friendly, innocent piece of artwork you can find on Facebook. But that's too offensive now. It's too offensive for a trans person to exist and, want to make a living. Meanwhile, 1 out of every 2 trans people attempt suicide in their life. A lot of them succeed. Because where I might have thousands of people willing to remind me that they know who I am, that they'll call me by the right name, that they'll use the right pronouns, there are people out there who don't even have one. Because they might get kicked out of their house. They might lose their job. They might lose their home. Because in all but 1 state, it is still legally to kill us if you find out we're trans and you panic so hard over your fragile masculinity that you just have to kill us. The panic defense. Ain't America great? The same people who tote how much freedom they have and their right to defend it find it offensive that shit that has nothing to do with them exists. People like to say, love the country or get the fuck out. What they really mean by that is, if you don't follow the particular norms of my subculture, you shouldn't exist. I don't like guns. Therefore, I'm a bad American. I don't celebrate holidays. Therefore, I'm not a good American. I'm neurodivergent. Therefore, I'm not a good American. Everybody who wants to take away someone's right to exist in public is always telling other people how they can be better at being themselves. You can be an activist as long as you don't make anybody uncomfortable or stop traffic or make them confront something that they don't want to deal with. Constantly moving the goalposts. All you have to do is look at Black Lives Matter and see just how willing people are to let people have that freedom of speech they're always talking about. If they protest in the streets, well, they might block an ambulance. Therefore, we better not take them seriously. They're just as bad as the KKK. We better not take them seriously. One person takes a knee during the national anthem and literally says nothing. They should not have their job. Because even when you silently protest, doing nothing is too much for people who don't want to be uncomfortable and want to maintain the status quo. I'm going to read an excerpt that I wrote right after the president was elected. I wrote this book 6 days after the election of Donald Trump. And I hope it made a lot of people uncomfortable. Fuck you. That was because I was sitting 6 days after the election of Donald Trump in a classroom where he or his kids or his grandkids may have had a class once upon a time, because we have the same alma mater. Or he at least paid for a degree with his name on it, given his English capabilities and the fact that I had to slam my brain into a freaking wall for 4 years just to get out of there with a piece of paper. I'm not sure how someone who uses the word kafetha got through Penn. But I'm actually going to read you another excerpt from this, because I know a lot of people are wondering, what does being trans have to do with being an atheist? And before I read this, I'll say, at ReasonCon, a gathering of a lot of atheists, even podcasters, who wanted a safe place to drink and not be bothered for a few hours, called me Callie Wright 4 times, and called Celeste Marissa McCool. Because the trans woman must be the one I've heard of. I guess we all look alike. This is from chapter 12 of my book, PC Lie. It's easy to be an atheist, right? They're always open-minded and accepting toward that sort of thing. It at least must be comfortable to be accepted by a society, unlike religion, which shuns those sort of things, yes? Not really. Yeah, the Skeptic podcast community has embraced me, and for that I couldn't be more grateful. But part of what halted my initial coming out process was the way I was treated in the atheist Facebook groups. They denied my identity, they shamed me, called me names, and fetishized me in other places. It turned me off from making a lot of public posts in groups, even among atheists. It sucks enough being part of one social minority that think Christmas, Christians are ruining the world, but I'd like to give them a double whammy. How are they ever going to accept me in the mainstream if my identities piss them off so much just for existing? I'm not a firebrand atheist, but it's tempting. Especially when the religious right elects Donald fucking Trump, who has as much in common with the religious mission as he does with being a giant squash. How am I supposed to take it seriously now? I've never had a problem with the religious person on an individual basis. Most have been very kind to me once they've gotten to know me and accept that I have a different philosophical background than they do. They're usually willing to talk, even when I've interviewed them for a show. We've had plenty of good discussions with the religious people, and most have gone well. But then there are people like Pastor Carl, ready to print us a ticket to hell for anything like a revealing shoulder on a garment or drinking wine. I can't imagine living under that kind of scrutiny. I can't imagine giving 10% of my earnings to a business that doesn't pay taxes and continues to be inundated with child molestation cases. I can't imagine giving an organization so much control of my life that I'm not allowed to think for myself, and one that convinces me that voting for Donald Trump is a mission from Jesus himself. It's like Jesus said, take care of the poor by gentrifying the neighborhood and starving them out. Get those property taxes up. Excuse me. They're going to be the greatest poverty taxes ever. You're not going to believe it. Some of my best friends kill impoverished people. Impoverished, that's the word they're called, right? That's what they prefer. Everybody's so PC. I'm not a believer, but I'm not mad at God. I love when religious people imply that or say that directly. It's the plot of every Christian movie that converts an atheist Kevin Sorbo. He was really just mad at God for killing his wife, and that's why he just had to be saved. I believe. Someone tell Hercules no one gave a shit when he was Hercules, please. I don't like a business telling me that I'm a bad person and that good people go to hell for not being just like them. I don't like being a part of a group that discriminates and protests because of every little thing not being about them. I can't be a part of a group that thinks the biggest problems in our society result from not having prayer in school and what color the Starbucks holiday cup is. I can't imagine wanting to believe that the world is 6,000 years old because people who lived before the era of modern science guessed it by taking a retranslated book literally. They're always so adamant about it too. Then Ken Ham gets to make a business that discriminates on religious grounds but also gets public tax money. Fuck that bullshit. It's a business designed to control people. I'm sure it has good intentions a lot of the time, or at least as much as Amish Wolverine can manage. Copyright skating atheists. The community is an essential part to human survival, but it doesn't have to be based on paying no taxes and still taking money from seniors and the government. It doesn't have to be based on hate, discrimination, a complete disregard for information, and going onto college campuses and yelling slurs at 18-year-old kids. How is that okay? How is it okay to emulate the Westboro Baptist Church? Why does anyone find that kind of hatred so appealing? I'm an atheist, not because I'm mad at anyone, but because it makes the most sense to me. And I can't begin to tell you how much condescending but well-intended bullshit I hear from people about it. You'll change your mind when you get older. Oh, you just don't know any better yet. Shame on you. How can you look around and not see the evidence for God? Have you seen a sunset? Shouldn't you believe just in case it's right? My favorite is the last one, Pascal's wager, or as I like to call it, God's insurance policy. Fuck that. I can't convince myself of something just because that's what it might be. If you're only believing to not go to hell, that's not a real belief. And if God is saying it's bad to kill and rape people is the only thing keeping you from those things, I'm terrified of what's going to happen when someone's not there to tell you all your opinions. We're all raised differently, and we all come to different conclusions about the questions of life. But when people start using their own to run the lives of other people and also suggest that their group be the only ones allowed to express those in public, I have a problem with it. I'm also sick and fucking tired of the persecution complex that always rears its head this time of year. It was November at the time. Oh, we're not allowed to say Merry Christmas anymore because someone might be offended. Get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. Just because stores force people to say Happy Holidays doesn't mean you can't say Merry Christmas. It's perhaps just that other people who aren't you might want to be acknowledged. I spent more than half my life in retail. I worked on Black Friday enough times to see what the worst of American humanity and capitalism is. What it turns people into is frightening. They push, shove, and get violent to buy a thing to give to people they claim to love, all in the name of someone who told them to love anyone and shun material possession. Really nailing it here, America. I've had to work on Thanksgiving and Christmas so people could go buy more shit. Had to spend most of my holiday seasons hearing the same 10 holiday songs over and over again, working later hours and spending less time with my family so that people could buy things more. It's made me a bit bitter. No kidding. And I acknowledge that. But many years in retail really dampens your enjoyment of the holiday of rampant commercialism. If I never hear any of the Christmas songs from the most recent retail job I have, it'd be too soon. It was less than an 8-hour playlist that never changed. So you'd hear the same songs at least once a day. Except one year where there was a glitch in the system and that made it 2 hours long. So the same playlist 4 times a day minimum. There are some songs that can send me into a blind rage because of that holiday experience. I don't get into holidays for the most part anyway. It's not just because of working in retail, but that likely didn't help. I still haven't lost that cynicism, but even after having a space from it, I have no desire to return to it. I like to give people things because I want to, not because it's an expected societal custom. And people bitching that they can't only have their holiday and nobody else's and nobody can celebrate or acknowledge it any different than how they do it, gets tiresome when you see the same memes and arguments every fucking year. The war on Christmas is the biggest piece of bullshit from propaganda mountain that surrounds this holiday, and it's further polarized people based on whether or not they enjoy it the quote-unquote right way. This Christmas, I'll fake it long enough for my kids to have a good day. Then I'll smoke a bowl and fall asleep watching When Nature Calls. The day means absolutely nothing to me, but I know it does to other members of my family, so I'll participate simply for them. That's you. The kids love it and deserve to have a day to get things and enjoy their relatives, but I feel like I don't need an assigned day for that purpose. Thankfully, I don't have to work the entire time, only getting Christmas off and then dealing with International Ungrateful Day the next day anymore. But it hasn't completely left my system, and I don't know if it ever will. It can pass like any other day, and I don't think I'd feel any different about it. Call it cynical, but that's the way I feel. It's not only skeptical podcasters that have changed my mind on how pacifist I've been on my opinions of religion, though I do at least try to treat everyone with respect. But your religion or lack thereof doesn't make you superior to anyone else. And if there's a God who really does send people to hell for not accepting the right book or philosophy, I'm not sure I want anything to do with that to begin with. We don't need to get into the problems they've caused for the LGBT community. I think that those are well versed in this book by proxy, which I do have available. But any organization that targets us specifically to bully and talk down to and try to send to electroshock therapy is not all right by me. I usually at least try to have a conversation about most issues, but that's one I don't budge on anymore. If you have a problem with LGBT people and think they deserve less rights simply for existing, I'd rather you fist yourself with a rabid porcupine than acknowledge that shit as some kind of fairness doctrine. I'm not obligated to live up to your morals and customs, and that doesn't make you any better than me that you get yours from a different book. It also doesn't work the other way around, and I will always try to respect that as well. But let's not pretend that we have equal protection under the law. RFRAs are created for one reason: legal Jesus discrimination. Shove your sincerely held religious beliefs where they belong and call it what it is. It has nothing to do with beliefs. It only has to do with moral superiority and kicking someone when they've lost a fight in a different way. I've had to check out customers who went against my beliefs and customs all the time. Be a grown-up and do the same thing, whether or not you quote-unquote support their lifestyle. I don't need your approval, Barbara. Just complete the transaction so we can both move on with our day. Then we get into the meaningless platitudes. And so many of you will know exactly who and what I'm talking about. But I'm not going to go there. I think you get the point. The point is, you can hide being an atheist. We still get treated like shit, but you can hide that. When my tits start coming in, people are going to notice. Some people can stealth it. I can't, and I choose not to. But the whole point of this was visibility. Because if people are at least not willing to yell slurs at me or try to beat me up or think that I should be killed, the next thing that tends to come out of their mouth is, God, it's such a criminal to be a straight white guy anymore. Look at it. We're villains in all the movies now. Star Wars thinks that only straight white men are villains. I can't handle this much densely concentrated stupid. Once again, when you spend your whole life in a privileged position and where you're maybe 90% of all movies, other people showing up can feel like oppression for some reason. Raise your hand if you can name a movie that doesn't revolve around a white, straight guy trying to get a girl that's saying no to him. It's rhetorical. Point is, I can name 10 movies off the top of my head whose protagonist is a straight white guy who's just going to prove to that girl that he loves her so much and is going to interrupt her wedding or hold up a boombox or commit some other thing that would be called stalking in real life and show just how much he loves her. Can anyone name a trans man actor? Can anyone name a movie where a trans person exists and that isn't the joke? First one that comes to my mind when it comes to a trans person existing, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, 1994, where we're taught that the fact that a woman might have had a penis means you should burn all your clothes, induce vomiting, set them all on fire, and cry in the shower until the end of the movie. Silence of the Lambs. The way trans people transition is cutting off skin and making a woman's suit out of it. Psycho. We dress up as our dead mother and kill people. The Rocky Horror Picture Show. We're aliens sent from another planet to fuck your wife. Okay, that last one's true. Can we get one trans character that isn't played by a cis person, please? And I know some people will say, well, they're actors. That's what they're supposed to do. But we exist. And it'd be nice if someone who can empathize with our experience beyond reading a script could portray that. It's starting to happen a little more, but it seems like every time there's a trans role in a movie, it's played by a cis person. Even about Stonewall, a revolution that was started primarily by a trans woman of color. We couldn't get represented there. We got to drown that part out. But there's just too much focus on trans people these days. We're a boutique issue, right, Bill Maher? Trans kids wanting to use the bathroom without being bullied. That's the reason Trump got elected. It has nothing to do with the fact that we didn't start that fight. They lost the gay marriage fight and then said, let's find a more marginalized community. And then they blamed us for saying, hey, could you not do that? Trump's our fault. On behalf of all trans people, I apologize for Donald Trump. I wasn't thinking. I wanted to use the women's restroom, and it got out of control. And Trump is my fault. I'm sorry, Bill Maher, and all the other prominent atheists who think that trans issues are what caused the election of Trump. Not that there are any others I can name, Sam Harris, Peter Boghossian, James Lindsay. Oh yeah, I read the fucking paper. There's also the cliche that somehow Tumblr created our gender identity because there's just so many labels. Do you know that the first governor of the New York, New Jersey colony was a trans person? I'm pretty sure he didn't have a Tumblr page. I'm pretty sure Two-Spirit Native American people didn't learn about their gender identity from a persuasive essay in the gay dictionary. I'm pretty sure that a trans person who decided to transition in the 1960s or the 1980s didn't go, you know, I could go through the rest of my life using the bathroom where I want, being called the proper name, not having an invasive surgery, not having to swallow hormones, not having to deal with body changes, not having to deal with people rejecting you, not having to deal with loss of family, having a harder time getting hired. Yeah, that sounds great. Sign me up. I guess you're interested. Okay, I should pitch that better. All right, where is it? I don't know. I had it. Do you guys want to see a trans actor? Sure. Yeah. I am a Shakespearean trained actor, and one of my favorite things to do is read Shakespeare. Well, perform Shakespeare. Because so many of you have never seen a transgender actor, and not just a cis person playing a transgender person, I'm going to read you my favorite monologue. Because I can. They gave me the mic and told me to be here. I can do whatever I want. Okay, spoiler, Hamlet dies in the end. Does anybody not know that? You've had 400 years to read the play.
I was this close to finishing it.
Well, it is hard to get through that old English sometimes. I'm going to throw a little bit of it on you now. I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for a day confined to fast and fires till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. But that I am forbid to tell the secrets of my prison house, I could a tale unfold whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood, make thy two eyes like stars start up from their spheres, thy knotted and combined locks to each part, and each particular hair to stand on end like quills upon the fretful porcupine. But this eternal blazon must not be to ears of flesh and blood. List, list, oh list, if thou didst ever hear that thy father loved, revenge his foul and most unnatural murder. 'Tis given out that sleeping in my orchard, a serpent stung me. So the whole ear of Denmark is by a forged process of my death rankly abused. But know, thou noble youth, the serpent that did sting thy father's life now wears his crown. Thy uncle, aye, that incestuous, that adulterous beast, with witchcraft of his wit, with traitorous gifts, oh wicked wit and gifts that have the power so to seduce, won his shameful lust, the will of my most seeming virtuous queen. Oh Hamlet, what a falling off was there from me, whose love was that of dignity, that it went hand in hand with that vow I made to her in marriage, and to decline upon a wretch whose natural gifts were poor to those of mine? But virtue, as it will never be moved, though lewdness court it in a shape of heaven, so lust, though to a radiant angel linked, will sate itself in a celestial bed and prey on garbage. But soft methinks I scent the morning air. Brief let me be, sleeping within my orchard, my custom always that of the afternoon. Upon my secure hour thy uncle stole, with juice of accursed Hebona in a vial, and in the porches of my ears did pour that leprous distilment, whose effect holds such an enmity with blood of man, that swift as quicksilver it courses through the natural gates and alleys of the body, and with a sudden vigor it doth possess and curd, like eager droppings into milk, the thin and wholesome blood. So did it mine, and a most instant had I barked about, most laser-like with a vile and loathsome crust, all my smooth body. Thus I was sleeping by a brother's hand, of life, of crown, of queen at once dispatched, cut off even in the blossoms of my sin, unhouselled, disappointed, unnettled, no reckoning made, but sent to my account with all my imperfections on my head. Oh, horrible, horrible, most horrible! If thou hast nature in thee, bear it not. Let not the royal bed of Denmark be a couch for luxury and damned incest. But howsoever thou pursues this act, taint not thy mind, nor let thy soul contrive against thy mother aught. Leave her to heaven, and those thorns that in her bosom lodge to prick and sting her. Fare thee well at once. The glowworm shows the matin to be near, and gins to pale his ineffectual fire. Adieu, adieu, adieu. Remember me. But us trans people can't act. I'm going to wrap up. Thank you. I'm going to wrap up here with something I performed before. I was the first trans person in 17 years of Penn performing the vagina monologues that a trans person was represented, that a trans person was cast. I wrote this because I felt like I wanted to have my own monologue. But instead, they had 6 cis people read the trans monologue right after I was on stage, because it's not like anybody noticed. But then, at the Carlisle YWCA a few weeks later, I read this backstage, and the director said, "Screw the license, you're reading that." Because Eve Ensler is very particular about what gets read. You're not even allowed to improvise. And this person, whose name is Chris, loved this piece so much that she risked her license to perform the vagina monologues because she insisted I read this one. So this is how I will leave you. Hopefully, now that you've spent some time getting to know me, this monologue will make a little more sense than starting out with a poem I wrote about all the shitty things people have said to me. It's called Once Unspoken. To the world, I'm 31. To myself, I'm 13. 13 years ago, that's when I got my name. The name that would stick in my mind, the name I would crave to be called, the name that made me cry at night, the name that made me wish it'd gone away, that was the name that stayed in my heart. A drag queen is what I thought I was because I didn't know any better. We weren't educated on such things. Even the open-minded among us to our group's conversations and movies, trans people existed only as jokes, punchlines, comedy, fodder, plot twists. That was all we knew. Drag queen is what I let them call me, to pretend I was laughing with them instead of believing the laughter was at me. But I love the makeup. Hard to tell, right? I love the makeup, the clothes, the shoes, the way my eyes looked with mascara, the way my legs felt smooth to the touch, the way I unapologetically felt myself, and nobody could take that from me. But I had to keep it a secret. It was too much for some people to handle. They thought I should be a real man, be a provider, a protector, a breadwinner, the cuddler, the kisser, the initiator. Even those who said they understood, maybe appreciated the dynamic, thought it was kind of hot, always defaulted to the traditional expectation. Too emotional, too needy, too affectionate. Stop trying to be the little spoon. Stop being scared at loud noises. Stop wearing such bright colors. Stop skipping. Stop dancing. Stop singing. Stop wearing eyeliner. Stop tilting your head. Stop putting your hand on your hip. Stop being so girly. Growing up pretending to be a boy, girly was the worst thing you could be. You play like a girl. You cry like a girl. You were a pussy if you were weak. You were a girlfriend if you didn't like guns. Girls couldn't rape guys because you can't rape the ruling, right? LOL, am I right? Hey, baby, you don't need the gun. High five, bro. I craved to be protected. I adored feeling like people wanted to stand up for me, to let me cry, to let them be there for me. But I couldn't. I wasn't being honest with myself because I was scared, terrified. What would the world think? What would my parents think? What would happen to me? Would I be bullied? Beaten, assaulted, killed? Then I found the queer dictionary. I read through the words, the labels, the definitions. I wasn't a drag queen. I wasn't a cross-dresser. Transgender, though? That seemed right. But it was too much commitment, so I went with genderqueer, non-binary, gender fluid, gender non-conforming, all of which are valid identities, by the way. Anything that allowed me to be Marissa but not take the full jump. No hormones, no shots, no meds, nothing permanent. Permanent was scary. However, as I became Marissa, I stopped liking being called sir. I began to hate my dead name. I began to hate being associated as a guy, a male, a him, a dude, a bro. Thank you very much, sir. Have a nice day, sir. Is this your husband? Is this your father? I wanted to be one of the girls. I wanted to be a girl. I am a girl. I couldn't even commit to it when I went on HRT. But my spouse referred to me as Marissa, Rissy monster. He called me beautiful, precious, princess, baby girl. All the things I wanted to be called my entire life, but wasn't allowed because that'd be gay, right? But then two people took from me. Like thieves in the night, they stole. They took my body. They took my rights. They took my voice. They took my consent. I hid. I ran. I fled. I became numb, distant, vacant. I cut my hair, ditched outfits, tossed aside the makeup. Died inside every time someone called me Alex, but I dealt with it. Because if that's what the world was like to people like me, I had to hide. Then one day he came to our school. Pastor Carl, my old friend. Fuck you, Pastor Carl. Filled with hate, bigotry, moral superiority, slurs, death threats, damnation, scare tactics, humiliation, and self-righteousness. He called girls sluts, gave people words I won't repeat, and trans acceptance was the reason Penn had a suicide problem. Which the 4 years I was there, 13 people committed suicide, 13 kids. But it was our fault because we exist. Penn had a suicide problem, not because of bullies like him, but because being who we are was subconscious defiance of truth. That's why we hurt. That's why we suffered. That's why we died, because Pastor Carl knew the truth and we ran from it. We only chose to be who we were to mock God. As I stood up to him, I was no longer afraid. Nothing he said could touch me. Nothing he said could penetrate my shield. Nothing he said mattered. So I yelled directly in his face, "I'm transgender. Fuck you." That was it. I was out. I was Marissa. Then we got a new president and all hell broke loose. The same fear I'd had for years seemed to consume the many. So I wrote, yelled, podcasted, published, guested, stood up, stood out, owned who I was, and within 3 months, I was Marissa fucking McCool. Published author, LGBT columnist, trans podcaster, guest of the Lehigh Valley Humanists, and now here, performing, reading, as me, as Marissa Alexa McCool, who I've always been, true. Tonight is not my first or even 100th time on stage in public. But at the time that I wrote this, it was going to be the first time, the very first time. And now it's more like the 100th. That any cast list, guest list, or program will read Marissa Alexa McCool. And that, my dear friends, was worth every step of the journey. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Thank you so much, Marissa. We are going to take some Q&A, but I want to make a couple announcements. So when everything's done, for those of you who are staying for lunch, if you brought food or placed a lunch order or just want to hang out with us, just grab a chair and come back to the other room there where we have some tables set up. And also, Riss, you brought some stuff to sell, right? Some books and T-shirts and that kind of thing?
I didn't have any T-shirts because people wanted them. So I can order them for you.
Okay, great.
I have my 2 novels. Well, not my 2 novels. I have my first novel under my identity, which also has essays from, among others, Kathy Van Cleve, who is a Penn professor, and Lucinda Illusions. I have the book I'm pretty much known for, The PC Lie, How American Voters Decided I Don't Matter, with contributions from Andrew Torres, next month's guest, Eli Bosnick, my husband, and the foreword was by Chris Cluey. And this one I just put out because I had a poem I wanted to write, and I needed a title for it, Silent Dreams, and it's a collection of some of my essays and poetry. My next book coming out is called Voice in the Dark, and some of the names that are published in it, Dan Errol, No Illusions, Karen Garst, and Dan Errol. So I write fast.
Fantastic. So we're going to go ahead with Q&A now. We are going to ask you to use the mic because otherwise it won't make the video. So if you think there's going to be any follow-up, just hang on to it before giving it back to me. But who has a question for Riss? All right, let's start with Michael.
Hi. First, thank you for coming and speaking.
Thank you for having me.
Speaking as a, well, you have many labels that you self-identify with, but anyways, what kinds of conversations do you find yourself having with other trans people that are believers?
It's not my place to speak for other trans people. If that's what gets them through the night, if that's what helps them feel like there's hope, I'm not going to begrudge them of that. But I'm not going to pretend that I believe it either. Every trans person has their own story, pretty much the same. Every person has their own story. And with the shit that we have to deal with, so many of them need hope. And if that's where they can get it, I'm fine with it. But the labels are pretty much how I'm able to explain myself without having to recite this entire speech. And it's a shortcut. So whenever someone says, why do you have so many labels? It's like, you should see what happens when I'm given a live mic and no script.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Riss?
Not everybody all at once.
Okay, Dave.
Do you consider yourself an actor, or are you more interested in writing?
I consider myself a Cleveland Indians fan. Sorry, I got to borrow a little Will McAvoy there. I'm all of the things. I try to do as many things as possible. I host or co-host 5 podcasts. I just finished my 4th book since November. But I love to perform. I've done improv at conventions. I wrote my own wedding and performed it. I just like to be. I like to perform. I like to be on stage. I like to speak. And fortunately, a lot of those things work well with each other.
George Carlin was an improviser. You're an improviser. But the end of George Carlin's career, he wrote stuff down. And things that he articulated towards the end of his career.
It's all right.
Had the clarity of Shakespeare. I hope that's your goal.
If I can even be in the same book of world history as William Shakespeare, I think I've done something right. And thank you. I can't tell you what that means to me, and I hope you're okay. I didn't mean to upset you. Carlin wrote everything obsessively. A lot of his improv was more reacting to hecklers. But he considered comedy a job. He had a clock in. He had a time clock that he punched every day when he worked. And Jon Stewart talked about his 40th year of comedy special. Did you see that? Oh, he talked about right before Carlin went on stage, even after 40 years, he was walking back and forth, doing his routine, and he treated words like music. So he had it down to pitch, space, like a blues guitarist would, or like a singer would. Because if you listen to some of Carlin's early stuff, he's very musical and he liked to talk about it. And his early bits about being on AM and FM radio, man could sing. So, as much as he's known for being an improv artist, I consider him a wordsmith and someone who was willing to take his blue-collar upbringing and apply it toward what he loved, what his passion was. So that old adage of do what you love and what you're passionate about, it can happen. And he was one of the best at what he did.
Marissa, I have a question. So there's one of us that couldn't be here today that really has a passion for professional wrestling.
Oh, God.
They're the biggest professional wrestling fan I know. I think some of you know who I'm talking about.
Strong disagree.
So he will undoubtedly be watching the video. So why do you like professional wrestling? and what can the rest of us maybe that aren't super fans learn from it?
When I was in 6th grade, before I knew what trans was, I knew I was different. I was the feminine kid. I got beat up constantly and called words that would one day be used to describe me. And then I tuned into a show where a guy who could seemingly control fire put on a mask and beat the shit out of anyone who upset him. And that was cathartic. That was my escapism, because I didn't have school as a safe place. I didn't have home as a safe space, because that was difficult at the time too. So every Monday night, I tuned into a TV show where athletes are also actors and somewhat rock stars. And I found catharsis through somebody who could stand up and face his demons. And he did it for 20 years. And now he's running for mayor. I will pay to be at that inauguration. But when I got divorced at age 21, because I'm amazing at things like that, I said, I have no money, I have no job, I have no life. I should go be a professional wrestler. And I was terrible, but I tried harder than anyone in that group of trainees, and I got to be one for like 3 years, even though I was probably the worst person on the show. I got to win a professional wrestling match because I just wanted it that badly. And then once I stopped doing that, because concussions are a thing, and when you're in your young 20s and have no health insurance, I'm not good at life decisions, people. That's why I have partners who tell me when I'm grounded. I started writing about it because I still watched, even though it was now the perspective of, oh, hey, it's Phil. I know him. But I started recording my thoughts live, and I posted them in a column and got hired by one of the biggest professional wrestling websites not associated with WWE. And for some reason, people gave a shit. And this Monday, I will publish my 300th column. So that's what wrestling has meant to me. It was a way to be a professional athlete, a professional actor, and a rock star all at once, because there is nothing in this world that can recreate the adrenaline of pushing through a curtain to your own chosen theme music. And from that moment until the moment you disappear behind that curtain and become who you are again, you don't have to be you. You don't have to have your backstory. You don't have to have your fears. You don't have to have whatever shitty thing someone said on the internet to you that day. You're just that character. And you can either make people love you or piss you off, and either way, it's fun. Pissing people off is more fun. The bad guys are so much more fun.
Any other questions for us before we break? Yeah.
Your hair is awesome.
Thank you. Yours is too. Growing up, have you ever had someone that you looked up to, especially when you started expressing who you really are?
Define growing up, because I'm going through second puberty right now. So
Well, when you were younger.
when I was younger,
Yeah.
not really. I had people I admired from a professional standpoint, like George Carlin or Kane, who was the wrestler I was describing. But I didn't find anyone who I could say, yes, I know that experience, until I would say the last couple years. Callie Wright from the Atheist Manifesto, who is now a very personal friend of mine. My girlfriend, Amy, who is a podcaster on a podcast called Ginger Snaps. I have 3 partners. I'm polyamorous, and all 3 of them are podcasters. Are you seeing a pattern here? But the person who first really reached me, who I read her words and I said, holy shit, that makes so much sense, is Laura Jane Grace, who I didn't learn about her through her band because apparently everybody assumed I already knew who she was, and I'm still mad at all of you. But her book called Tranny, where she talked about being a punk rock star and hiding the fact that she was trans until she literally couldn't take it anymore, but still was rebellious and wild and didn't give a fuck what people thought. That's who I've always aspired to be like, Laura Jane Grace. So if I had a trans hero, so to speak, it would be her. And I think I'm giving that away with that.
Thank you.
Last call for questions. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get ready for lunch. Great. Okay, I don't know, John, is the food here yet?
I don't think it is.
It should be here pretty soon. But we're going to go ahead, and if you're staying, just like I said, move a chair over to the back. Riss is staying with us. She'll be selling some things. And if you owe us for lunch, there's plenty of change now after having passed around the basket that you can just pay what you think you owe, make change for yourself. We'll be back there. But I want to thank everyone for coming. Next week, like I said, we have discussion group. If you want to see what's coming, even for the events that aren't up at Meetup yet, there's at least a placeholder on our website, lvhumanist.org/events. Or if you just Google the High Valley Humanists, I'm sure it'll get you there. Thanks to our webmaster, Adam in the back, who's also our AV guy.
And
So-
you may not take cards, but I do. So
Fantastic. Fantastic. So thank you, everyone, for coming. And please give another round of applause for our special guest today, Marissa McCool.